Okay, so this will be chapter 7 of Prodigy as evidenced by the title of this video, but it is a Sunday, and for that I wanted to explain what's going to happen with the channel, because this is still going to remain a Wednesday only book, but I will have to go back to my house that's not this one, the other location that you guys see me film from, to get the book. It's going to be Book Lovers posted on Sunday. Then the lake is going to be the normal days, and Prodigy is going to return to Wednesdays only. But I wanted to explain why this was on a Sunday instead, because I know that this book is not necessarily the favorite on the channel, because I do read a lot of horror books. And then the lake still has a couple of weeks left in it. I think might only be 2 or 3. But after that, I did get a recommendation for another book by the author of 14 Ways to Die, which I should have looked it up before, but it's something about a key and a house. Somebody recommended it in the comments, and I didn't want to be rude to them and just act like I completely ignored it, because I was sincere when I said that I will be reading it eventually. It just took a while to come in, and then I wanted to finish the lake first, so that will be coming as soon as the lake's over, but the lake still has like 20-ish chapters left in it, so that'll be happening for a little bit still. But without further ado, this is chapter 7 of Prodigy. June. I can't bring myself to look at Day again before leaving him behind. As Razor's Patriot walks me away from the front entrance of the Pharaoh Pyramid, I keep my face pointed firmly away from him. It's for the best, I tell myself. If the mission goes well, it'll only be a short separation. Day's concerns about my well-being really hit home now. Razor's plan for me sounds good, but something could go wrong. What if, instead of taking me to see the Elector, I'm shot the instant I'm found? Or they could strap me upside down in an interrogation room and beat me senseless. I've seen it happen plenty of times. I could be dead before this day is over, long before the Elector learns I've been found. A million things could go wrong. That's why I have to focus, I remind myself, and I can't do that if I stare into Day's eyes. Now the Patriot guides me inside the pyramid and down a narrow walkway running along one side of a wall. It's loud and chaotic in here. Hundreds of soldiers are milling around on the ground level. Razor had told me they would put me in one of the empty barrack rooms on the first floor, where I would pretend to be hiding before trying to sneak on board the RS Dynasty. When Republic soldiers knock down the door and come for me, I'm supposed to make a run for it, to give it all I've got. My steps quicken to match my guide's. Now we reach the end of the walkway, where a secure door 5 feet 6 wide, then 10 feet high, leads away from the main floor and into the hallways of the first floor barracks. The guide swipes a card across the door. It beeps, then blinks green and slides open. Put up a fight when they come for you, the Patriot tells me in a voice I can barely hear. His appearance is no different from any of the other soldiers here, with slicked back hair and a black uniform. Make sure they believe you don't want to be caught. You were trying to turn yourself in near Denver, okay? I nod. His attention shifts away from me. He studies the hall, tilting his head up to inspect the ceiling. A row of security cams lines this corridor, 8 in total, one facing the front of each barrack door. Before we step all the way into the hall, the guide pulls out a pocket knife and uses it to clip off one of the shiny buttons lining his jacket. Then he braces himself against the doorway, presses one foot against each side of the doorframe, and leaps up. I glance back down the hall. There are no other soldiers here at the moment, but what if one suddenly turns the corner? It's no surprise if they capture me here. That's our goal after all. But what about my guide? He reaches up toward the first security cam, then uses the knife to scrape away some of the rubber coating protecting the cam's wires. When a bit of the rubber comes off and exposes the wires underneath, he wraps his fingers in the length of his sleeve and presses the metal button against the wires. A quiet burst of sparks. To my surprise, every security cam along the hall blinks off. How'd you break all of them with just one? I start to whisper. The guy jumps back down to the ground and motions for me to hurry up. I'm a hacker, he whispers back as we run. I've worked at the command centers here before. I rewired things a little to suit us. He smiles proudly, showing even white teeth. But this is nothing. Just wait till you hear about what I've done to Denver's Capitol Tower. Stop. I'm so sorry for her. She's so needy. Impressive. If Midas joined the Patriots, he'd be a hacker too, if he were alive. We sprint down the hall until he stops us at one of the doors. Barrack 4A. Here he pulls out a key card and swipes the door's access panel. It clicks and swings open a little. Inside, 8 rows of bunks and lockers sit in the dark. I cannot pet you from over there. Will you come over here? I really do apologize for her. She's being so grumpy today. Stop. Barrack 4A. Here he pulls out a key card and swipes the door's access panel. Stop! Stop! I am so sorry for her. She is so annoying sometimes. And swipes the door's access panel. It clicks and swings open a little. Inside, 8 rows of bunks and lockers sit in the dark. The hacker turns to face me. Razor wants you waiting here to ensure that the right soldiers capture you. He has a specific patrol in mind. Of course, makes perfect sense. It confirms that Razor doesn't want me beaten to a pulp by just letting any Republic patrol arrest me. Who? I start to ask, but he taps the edge of his military cap before I can finish. We'll all be watching your mission from the cams. Good luck, he whispers. Then he is gone, hurrying down the hall until he rounds a corner and I can't see him anymore. I take a deep breath. I'm alone. Time to wait for soldiers to arrest me. I quickly step inside the room and shut the barrack door. It's pitch black in here, no windows, not even a slit of light from under the door. Certainly a believable enough place for me to be hiding. I don't bother moving farther into the room. I already know what the layout is. Rows of bunk beds and a communal bathroom. I just flatten myself against the wall, right next to the door. Better to stay here. I reach out in the darkness and find the knob. Using my hands to measure, I gauge how far the knob is from the ground. 3 feet 6. That's probably how much space is between the doorknob and the top of the door frame, too. I think back to when we were still standing out in the corridor, picturing how much space is between the door frame's top edge and the ceiling. It must have been a little less than 2 feet. Okay, now all my details are in place. I settle back against the wall, close my eyes, and wait. 12 minutes drag by. Then farther down the hall outside, I hear a dog's bark. My eyes pop open. Ollie, I'd recognize that bark anywhere. My dog is still alive by some miracle. Joy and confusion wash over me. What the hell is he doing here? I press an ear against the door and listen. Several more seconds of silence. Then I hear the bark again. My white shepherd is here. Now thoughts are racing through my mind. The only reason why Ollie would be here is because he's with a patrol. The patrol that's hunting me down. And there's only one soldier who'd think to use my own dog to sniff me out. Thomas. The hacker's words come back to me. Razor wanted the right soldiers to capture me. He had a specific patrol in mind. Of course, that patrol, the person Razor had in mind, would be Thomas. Thomas must have been assigned by Commander Jameson to track me down. He's using Ollie to help. But of all the patrols, I'd prefer to be arrested by Thomas's ranks last on the list. My hands start to shake. I don't want to see my brother's murderer again. Ollie's barking growls steadily louder. Ollie's barking grows steadily louder. With it comes the first sounds of footsteps and voices. I hear Thomas's voice out in the corridor shouting to his soldiers. I hold my breath and remind myself of the numbers I'd calculated. They're right outside the door. Their voices have gone quiet, replaced by clicks. Safety on loaded guns. Sounds like some M-series, some standard issue rifles. The following seems to happen in slow motion. The door creaks open and light spills in. Immediately I make a small jump and step one leg up. My foot lands silently on the doorknob as the door swings toward me. As the soldiers enter the room with their guns drawn, I reach up and grab the top of the door frame by using the doorknob as a step. I pull myself up. Without a sound, I perch on top of the open door like a cat. Sorry, my hand is getting eaten while I'm trying to read this. She's a hot mess. They don't see me. They probably can't see anything except the darkness in here. I count them all in a flash. Thomas leads the group with Ollie at his side. To my surprise, Thomas doesn't have his gun drawn, and behind him are a cluster of 4 soldiers. There are more soldiers outside the room, but I can't tell how many. She's in here, one of them says with a hand pressed to his ear. She hasn't had a chance to board any airships yet. Commander DeSoto has confirmed one of his men saw her enter. Thomas says nothing. I watch him turn to observe the dark room. Then his gaze wanders up the door. We lock eyes. I leap down and knock him to the ground. In a moment of blind rage, I actually want to break his neck with my bare hands. It'd be so easy. The other soldiers clamor for their guns, but in the chaos I hear Thomas choke out an order. "Don't fire! Don't fire!" He grabs my arm. I almost manage to break free and dart through the soldiers and out the doorway, but a second soldier shoves me down. They're all on me now, a whirlwind of uniforms seizing my arms and dragging me to my feet. Thomas keeps shouting at his men to be careful. Razor was right about Thomas. He'll want to keep me alive for Commander Jameson. Finally, they cuff my hands and push me so hard against the floor that I can't move. I hear Thomas's voice overhead. "Good to see you, Miss Ypres." His voice shakes. "You're under arrest for assaulting Republic soldiers, for creating a disturbance in Balta Hall, and for abandoning your post. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I noticed he doesn't say anything about assisting a criminal. He still has to pretend the Republic executed Day. They pull me to my feet and lead me back down the hall. By the time we're in the sunlight, more than a few passing soldiers stop to watch. Thomas's men shove me unceremoniously into a waiting patrol jeep's back seat, chain my hands to the door, and lock my arms down in metal shackles. Thomas sits next to me and points his gun at my head. Ridiculous. The jeep ushers us back through the streets. The other two soldiers sitting in the jeep's front watch me in the rearview mirror. They act like I'm some sort of untamed weapon, and in a way I guess that's true. The irony of it all makes me want to laugh. Day is a Republic soldier on board the RS Dynasty, and I'm in the Republic's most valuable captive. We've switched places. Thomas tries to ignore me as we travel, but my eyes never leave him. He seems tired, with pale lips and dark circles rimming his eyes. Stubble dots his chin, a surprise in itself. Thomas would normally never show his face without being perfectly clean-shaven. Commander Jameson must have run him ragged for letting me escape from Balta Hall. They probably interrogated him for it. The minutes drag on. None of the soldiers talk. The one who drives us keeps his eyes firmly on the road, and all we can hear is the drone of the jeep's engine and the muffled sounds from the streets outside. I swear the others must be able to hear the hammering of my heart too. From here I can see the jeep driving ahead of us, and through its back window I see occasional flashes of white fur that make me feel incredibly happy. "Ollie, I wish you were in the same jeep as me." Finally I turn to Thomas. "Thank you for not hurting Ollie." I don't expect him to answer. Captains don't speak to criminals, he'd say. But to my surprise, he meets my gaze. For me, it seems, he's still willing to break protocol. Your dog turned out to be useful." He's Midas's dog. My anger starts rising again, but I push it back down. Useless to rage over something that won't help my plans. It's interesting that he kept Ollie alive at all. He could have tracked me down without him. Ollie's not a police dog and has no training in sniffing down targets. He couldn't have helped when they were trying to track me across half the country. He is only useful in very close range, which means that Thomas kept him alive for other reasons. Because he cares for me, or maybe he still cares for Midas. The thought startles me. Thomas's stare flickers away when I don't reply. Then there's another long silence. "Where are you taking me?" "You'll be held in the high desert penitentiary until after your interrogation, and then the courts will decide where you'll go." Time to put Razor's plans to work. "After my interrogation, I can guarantee that the courts are going to send me to Denver." One of the guards sitting up front narrows his eyes at me, but Thomas holds up a hand. "Let her talk," he says. "All that matters is that we deliver her unharmed." Then he glances at me. He seems gaunter than the last time I saw him too. Even his hair, combed neatly in a side part, is dull and limp. "And why is that?" "I have information the elector may be highly interested in." Thomas's mouth twitches. He's hungry to question me now, to uncover whatever secrets I might hold. But that's outside of protocol, and he's already broken enough rules by conversing idly with me. He seems to decide against pressuring me further. "We'll see what we can get out of you." Then I realize that it's a little strange they're sending me to a Vegas penitentiary at all. I should be interrogated and tried in my home state. "Why am I being held here?" I ask. "Shouldn't I be on my way to Los Angeles?" Thomas keeps his eyes forward now. "Quarantine," he replies. I frown. "What, it's spread to Balta now too?" His answer sends a chill down my spine. "Los Angeles is under quarantine. All of it." High Desert Penitentiary, room 416, 20 by 12 square feet, 22-24 hours, same day as my capture. I sit a few feet away from Thomas. Nothing but a flimsy table separates us. Well, if I don't count the number of soldiers standing guard beside him. They shift uncomfortably whenever I let my eyes rest on them. I sway a little in my chair, fighting back exhaustion, and clink the chains that keep my arms secured across my back. My mind is starting to wander. I keep thinking back on what Thomas said about Los Angeles and its quarantine. No time to dwell on that now, I tell myself, but the thoughts won't go away. I try to picture Drake University marked with plague signs, Ruby Sector streets crowded with plague patrols. How is that possible? How could the entire city be under quarantine? We've been in this room for 6 hours and Thomas has gotten nowhere with me. My answers to his questions lead us around in circles, and I've been doing it in a way so subtle that he doesn't realize I've been manipulating the conversation until he's wasted another hour. He's tried threatening to kill Ollie, to which I threatened to carry any information I had to my grave. He's tried threatening me, to which I reminded him of the taking information to my grave factor. He's even tried some mind games, none of which went even remotely well. I just keep asking him why Los Angeles is under quarantine. I've been trained in interrogation tactics as much as he has, and it's backfiring on him. He hasn't gotten physical with me yet, the way he had with Day. This is another interesting detail. It doesn't matter how much Thomas cares for me. If his superiors order him to use physical force, he'll do it. Since he hasn't hurt me yet, it means Commander Jameson told him not to. Odd. Even so, I can tell his patience with me is wearing thin. Tell me, Miss Icarus, he says after we're silent for a moment. What will it take for me to get something useful out of you? I keep my face expressionless. Already told you that. I'll trade you an answer for a request. I have information for the elector. You're in no position to bargain, and you can't keep this up indefinitely. Thomas leans back in his chair and frowns. The fluorescent lights cast long shadows under his eyes. Against the undecorated white walls of the room, aside from 2 Republic flags and the elector's portrait, Thomas stands out ominously in his black and red captain's uniform. Midas used to wear a uniform like that. I know Day is alive, and you know how we can find him. You'll talk after a few days without food or water. Don't assume what I will and won't do, Thomas, I reply. As for Day, I should think the answer's obvious. If he were alive, he'd head off to rescue his little brother. Any fool could guess that. Thomas tries to ignore my jab, but I can see the irritation on his face. If he's alive, he'll never find his brother. That location is classified. I don't need to know where Day wants to go. I need to know where he is. It makes no difference. You'd never catch him anyway. He won't fall for the same tricks twice. Thomas folds his arm. Was it really just a few weeks ago that the two of us sat together eating dinner at a Los Angeles cafe? The thought of LA brings me right back to the quarantine news, and I picture the cafe empty, covered with quarantine notices. Miss Icarus, Thomas says again, putting his palms flat on the table. We can continue like this forever, and you can just keep being snide and shaking your head until you collapse from exhaustion. I don't want to hurt you. You have a chance to redeem yourself to the Republic. In spite of everything you've done, I received word from my higher-ups that they still consider you to be quite valuable. So, Commander Jameson was involved in making sure I'm not harmed during my interrogation. How kind, I reply, letting sarcasm seep into my words. I'm luckier than Midas. Thomas stops, bows his head, and squeezes the upper bridge of his nose in exasperation. He sits like that for a moment, then he motions toward the other soldiers. Everyone out, he snaps. When the soldiers have left us alone, he turns back to me and leans forward to put his arms on the table. I'm sorry you have to be here, he says quietly. I hope you understand, Miss Icarus, that I'm bound by my duty to do this. Where's Commander Jameson? I reply. She's your puppet master, isn't she? I would have thought she'd come interrogating me as well. Thomas doesn't flinch at my taunt. She's containing Los Angeles at the moment, organizing the quarantine, and reporting the situation to Congress. With all due respect, the world does not revolve around you. Containing Los Angeles, the world shall me. Are the plagues really that bad right now? I decide to ask yet again, keeping my eyes firmly fixed on Thomas's face. Is L.A. quarantined because of illness? He shakes his head. Classified. When will it be lifted? Are all the sectors quarantined? Stop asking. I told you the whole city is. Even if I knew when it would be lifted, I'd still have no reason to tell you. I know instantly by his expression that what he actually means is, Commander Jameson didn't tell me what's going on in the city, so I have no idea. Why would she need to keep him in the dark? What happened to the city? I press, hoping to get more out of him. That's not relevant to your interrogation, Thomas replies, tapping his fingers impatiently against his arm. Los Angeles is no longer your concern, Miss Icarus. It's my hometown, I reply. I grew up there. Midas died there. Of course it's my concern. Thomas is quiet. His hand comes up to push dark hair away from his face. His hand comes up to push dark hair away from his face, and his eyes search mine. Minutes tick by. That's what all this is about, he finally mutters. I wonder if he's saying this because he's weary too, after 6 hours in this room. Miss Ippers, what happened to your brother? I know what happened, I interrupted him. My voice trembles in rising anger. You killed him. You sold him to the state. The words hurt so much that I can barely squeeze them out. His expression quivers. He lets out a cough and straightens in his chair. The order came directly from Commander Jameson, and the last thing I do is disobey a direct order from her. You should know this rule as well as I do, although I have to admit you've never been very good at following it. What, so you were just waiting to hand him over like that because he figured out how our parents died? He was your friend, Thomas. You grew up with him. Commander Jameson wouldn't have given you the time of day. You wouldn't be sitting across this table right now if Midas hadn't recommended you for her patrol. Or have you forgotten that? My voice rises. You couldn't risk even a fraction of your own safety to help him? It was a direct order, Thomas repeats. Commander Jameson is not to be questioned. What don't you understand about that? She knew that he'd hacked into the deceased person's database, along with a host of other high-security government catalogs. Your brother broke the law multiple times. Commander Jameson couldn't have a well-respected captain of her patrol committing crimes right under her nose. I narrow my eyes. And that's why you killed him in the dark alley, then framed Dave for it? Because you'd happily follow your commander's orders right off a cliff. Thomas slams his hand down on the table hard enough to make me jump. It was a signed order from the state of California, he shouts. Do you understand what I'm saying? I had no better choice. Then his eyes widen. He hadn't expected those words to come out, not that way. They stunned me too. He keeps talking now at a quicker pace, seemingly determined to erase the words. A strange light glows in his eyes, something that I can't quite pinpoint. What is it? I'm a soldier of the Republic. When I joined the military, I took an oath to obey my superior's orders at all costs. Midas took the same oath, and he broke it. There's something odd about the way he refers to Midas, a sort of hidden emotion that throws me off. The state is broken. I take a deep breath. And you're a coward for leaving Midas at its mercy. Thomas's eyes constrict as if I'd stabbed him. I study him closer, but he notices me analyzing him and jerks his face away, turning to the side and hiding his head in his hands. I think about my brother again, this time flipping in my mind through his many years spent in Thomas's company. Midas had known Thomas since they were kids, long before I was born. Whenever his father, our apartment floor's janitor, would bring Thomas along to accompany him during his work shifts, Thomas and Midas would play for hours on end. Military video games, toy guns. After I came into the picture, I remember the many quiet conversations the two of them would share in our living room, and how often they were together. I recall Thomas's trial score, 1365. Great for a poor sector kid, but average for kids in Ruby sector. Midas was the first to pick up on Thomas's intense interest in being a soldier. He'd spend entire afternoons teaching Thomas everything he knew. Thomas would never have made it into Emerald Sector's Highland University without my brother's help. My breath turns shallow as something falls into place. I remember the way Midas's gaze would linger on Thomas during their training sessions. I'd always assumed that was just my brother's way of studying Thomas's posture and performance for accuracy. I remember how patient and gentle Midas was when explaining things to Thomas, the way his hand would touch Thomas's shoulder. The night when I'd eaten a dom at that cafe with Thomas and Midas, when Midas first stopped shadowing Chien. The way Midas's hand would sometimes rest on Thomas's arm for a beat longer than it had to. The chat I had with my brother when he took care of me on the day of his induction. How he'd laughed. I don't need girlfriends. I've got a baby sister to take care of. And it was true. He dated a couple of girls in college, but never for longer than a week and always with polite disinterest. So obvious. How could I not have seen this before? Of course Midas never talked to me about it. Officer and subordinate relationships were strictly forbidden, harshly punished. Midas had been the one to recommend Thomas for Commander Jameson's patrol. He must have done it for Thomas's sake, even though he knew that it meant any chance of a relationship would be impossible. All of this flashes through my thoughts in a matter of seconds. Midas was in love with you, I whisper. Thomas doesn't reply. Well, is it true? You must have known. Thomas still doesn't answer. Instead, he keeps his head in his hands and repeats, I took an oath. Wait a minute, I don't understand. I lean back against my chair and take a deep breath. My thoughts are now a whirling, jumbled mess. Thomas's silence tells me far more than anything he'd said out loud. Midas loved you, I say slowly. My words are quivering. And did so much for you, but you still turned him in? I shake my head in disbelief. How could you? Thomas looks at me from his hands, a flash of confusion lighting his face. I never reported him. We face each other for a long time. Finally, I say through clenched teeth, tell me what happened then. Thomas stares off into space. Security admins found traces he left behind when he hacked through a loophole in the system, he replies, into the deceased civilians database. The admins reported it to me first with the understanding that I would pass the message to Commander Jameson. I'd always warned Midas about hacking. You cross the Republic too many times and eventually you get burned. Stay loyal, stay faithful. But he never listened. Neither one of you do. So you kept a secret? Thomas drops his head back into his hands. I confronted Midas about it first. He admitted it to me. I promised him I wouldn't tell anyone, but deep down I wanted to. I have never kept anything from Commander Jameson. He pauses here for a second. Turns out that my silence wouldn't have made a difference. The security admins decided to forward a message on to Commander Jameson anyway. That's how she found out. Then she tasked me with taking care of Midas. I listened in shocked silence. Thomas had never wanted to kill Midas. I tried to imagine a scenario that I can bear. Maybe he even tried to persuade Commander Jameson to assign the mission to someone else. But she refused, and he chose to do it anyway. I wonder whether Midas ever acted on his attraction, and whether Thomas reciprocated. Knowing Thomas, I doubt it. Did he love Midas back? He had tried to kiss me that night after the celebration for Day's capture. The celebratory ball, I muse aloud this time. I don't need to explain that evening for Thomas to know what I'm talking about. When you tried to, I trail off as Thomas continues to stare at the floor, his expression oscillating between blankness and pain. Finally, he runs a hand through his hair and mumbles. I knelt over Midas and watched him die. My hand was on that knife. I wait lightheaded for the words he's saying. He told me not to hurt you, Thomas continues. His last words were about you, and I don't know. At Day's execution, I tried to come up with a way to stop Commander Jameson from arresting you, but you made it so hard for people to protect you, June. You break so many rules, just like Midas. That night at the ball, when I looked at your face, his voice cracks. I thought I could protect you, and that the best way might be to keep you close to me, to try to win you over. I don't know, he repeats bitterly. Even Midas had trouble watching out for you. What chance did I have of keeping you safe? The evening of Day's execution, had Thomas been trying to help me when he escorted me down to see the Electro bomb storage basement? What if Commander Jameson was preparing to arrest me and Thomas tried getting to me first? To what? Help me escape? I don't understand. I did care for him, you know, he says through my silence. He pretends bravado, some false professionalism. Still, I hear a tinge of sadness. But I am also a soldier of the Republic. I did what I had to do. I shove the table aside and lunge for him, even though I know I'm chained down to my chair. Thomas jumps back. I stumble against my restraints, fall to my knees, and then grab for his leg. For anything. You're sick. You're so twisted. I want to kill him. I've never wanted this so much in my entire life. No, that's not true. I want Midas to be alive again. The guards outside must have heard the commotion because they come pouring in, and before I know it, I'm pinned down by several soldiers, cuffed with an extra set of shackles, and untied from my chair. They drag me to my feet. I kick out furiously, running through a list in my head of every attack I've ever learned in school, trying frantically to free myself. Thomas is so close. He's only a few feet away. Thomas just looks at me. His hands dangle at his sides. It was the most merciful way for him to go, he calls out. It makes me nauseous. I know he's right, and that Midas would have almost certainly been tortured to death had Thomas not taken him down in that alley. But I don't care. I'm blind, smothered by my anger and confusion. How could he do that to someone he loved? How could he possibly attempt to justify this? What is wrong with him? After Midas's death, on nights when Thomas sat alone in his home, did he ever step out of his facade? Did he ever shed the soldier and let the civilian grieve? I'm dragged out of the room and back down the corridor. My hands tremble. I fight to steady my breathing, to calm my racing heart, to push Midas back into a safe corner of my mind. A small part of me had hoped that I was wrong about Thomas, that he hadn't been the one to kill my brother. By the next morning, all traces of emotion have disappeared from Thomas's face. He tells me the Denver court has gotten wind of my request for the electorate and has decided to transfer me to the Colorado State Penitentiary. I'm off to the capital.